In this video, we're going to talk about how to prove the trig identity cosecant squared x minus 1 multiplied by sine x is equal to cosine squared x multiplied by cosecant x. And in general, when you're proving or verifying a trig identity, what you want to do is you want to first of all identify the more complicated looking side of the equal sign, which I would argue is the left-hand side in this case. And then we want to use a combination of algebra and the trig identities we see on the right-hand side of our screen to simplify and transform it to where it matches, in this case, the other side of the equal sign, which would be the right-hand side. And so typically the first thing that I look for is I look for factoring as a first step, maybe factoring out a greatest common factor. And we can't do that in this case. So the next thing I do is I kind of move on to, I look over the identities, I look over what we've got in the identities and see if we have anything that matches up. And the cosecant squared x minus 1 is suspect. That's the first thing I'm going to look at. Because typically if you have a sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, cotangent squared and plus or minus 1, typically you can make that match up with one of these Pythagorean identities that you see in purple. And the one that we're going to look at that involves cosecant squared x is this third one right down here. And we have, as it's written right now, cotangent squared x plus 1 is equal to cosecant squared x. But we could make this match up with what we have in the problem just by subtracting 1 from both sides. And if you do that, you're just going to be left with cotangent squared x on the left-hand side by itself equal to cosecant squared x minus 1. And that, now the right-hand side of our modified trig identity matches up with what we have in our problem. So anywhere we have cosecant squared x minus 1, we can instead put cotangent squared x in its place. And so just switching that out, we'll have cotangent squared x multiplied by sine x. Now keep in mind, after each step, what I would do is I would always look and make sure, look at what we're trying to match on the right-hand side and kind of think in that direction. So our first step, we used a Pythagorean identity, and now we want to somehow make cotangent squared x times sine x turn into cosine squared x times cosecant x. And this is kind of the stage where everything kind of gets a little bit easier, where I like to change everything to be in terms of sine and cosine. And so to be able to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to use this identity for cotangent x being equal to cosine x over sine x, one of our quotient identities. And so therefore our cotangent squared x, in the place of that, we're going to write cosine squared x over sine squared x. And so the idea is if just cotangent x is equal to cosine x over sine x, we could just square both sides over here if we wanted to. And then on the right hand side, we're squaring the top and the bottom, so you could apply that squared to the cosine and to the sine separately to make it match what you see on the screen right here that I just wrote. And so that was just exchanging out the cotangent squared x. So we still have a sine x being multiplied right there. And then you can see that the sine x is going to cancel out with one of the two sine x's being multiplied together in the denominator. And so now just writing what we have left over, after all that's simplified, we have cosine squared x over sine x. And so now again, what we want to do is we want to look back to the right-hand side of the equal sign, and we want to figure out what we're trying to match this to. So notice we have cosine squared x right there, and we have it right here. So that's a good sign. That looks like we're on the right track. So now we just want to make the cosecant x match with what we have as a 1 over sine x. But we're in luck because, again, if we look over our identities, we can see right here that cosecant squared x is the same thing as 1 over sine x. And so I'm just going to rewrite this to make it look a little bit easier as cosine squared x over 1 multiplied by 1 over sine x. That, of course, is just rewriting it in a way that's a little bit more digestible. And so then in the place of 1 over sine x, we're going to put cosecant x. And so that's going to give us cosine squared x over 1 multiplied by cosecant x. And then again, of course, we don't have to have this over 1 for the cosine squared x. And so what we have left over is cosine squared x multiplied by cosecant x. And that's what we wanted to match. So we're done. We've now verified, since what we changed the left-hand side to matches the right-hand side, we've proven that this is indeed a trig identity. And so in this case, we used a lot of tricks. First of all, we used one of our Pythagorean identities that we rearranged. Then we used algebra for the second step to cancel out the signs. And then we just rewrote everything in a way that's a little bit easier to look at. And then we used our reciprocal identity to change the 1 over sine x to cosecant x. But either way, you may have taken a different path and still gotten to the same answer. And that's the nice thing about these problems. The nice and kind of the bad thing too is there are multiple ways to get to the answer. So you can be creative. This isn't potentially the only way to do it.